please type into chat. You should have a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Tell me, yes, David, we can hear you, or don't type anything at all if you can't hear me. So can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, excellent. Okay, cool. So we're going to wait a few more minutes before starting the webinar, just so that all the latecomers can join in and enjoy all of the information that you are about to receive. In the meantime, in the next few minutes, while we're waiting for people to join in, I'd be happy to hear where y'all are from, what your status is in your GMAT prep. Are you a retaker? Is this the first time? Have you taken a course before? Do you have a target score? Any sort of information that you'd like to share, I would be very happy to hear. All right, and for the retaker, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. I hope it's Marianne or something like that. How much of an improvement do you need? Sort of where are you at, more or less? I see someone has taken it for a master's and needs to do it again for the PhD program. And we have a few first timers. And have you registered for the GMAT yet? For those of you who are first timers or retakers, do you have a specific test date, or are you still sort of in the air about it? 480 the first time around. Someone has it in 12 days. Ooh, that's very, very close for the 12-day guy. For the person who's taking it on July 29th, I hope you've studied and are prepared. There's honestly very little you can do in 2 weeks except for improve and polish what you already know. So if you feel that you are seriously unprepared for the exam at the moment, then my best suggestion for you would be to delay it. And of course, stay for the webinar to learn how you can best prepare for it in the next month or month and a half. So we have the 26th of July, the 26th of July. That's even closer. That's 9 days away. August 3rd, so that's also about 2 weeks away. Okay, so I see the majority of you here today are planning on taking the GMAT in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So how about you focus me in on what you'd like to get from this webinar? It seems that, at least for the moment, there's relatively few of us here in chat. So I can really try and customize this webinar to your specific needs if possible. So given that you're taking the GMAT, at least 3 of you, within the next 2 to 3 weeks, what would you like to get from this webinar? What's important for you to learn about? Okay, strategies. Could you elaborate a bit what you mean by strategies? Okay, reading comprehension. Integrated reasoning. Oh, don't worry at all about integrated reasoning. No one ever worries about integrated reasoning. It's there for various reasons, but at the end of the day, when they're looking at your application, all they care about is the verbal to quant. You need to get sort of a mediocre, like an average score on your essays and on your integrated reasoning. Other than that, don't worry about it at all. Time management. Time management is a very important issue, which we will discuss. Skills that can help me answer questions faster, things that push me from 600 to 700. We are definitely going to talk about that today. All right, 1 or 2 more comments, and then I think I will officially start this webinar. And if others join us as we go along, then they'll just have to fill in the gap. All right. in the quant and the verbal. Okay, so I think that's going to close the comments for now. So I would like to officially welcome you to today's webinar. My name is David. I'm a senior tutor at ExamPal. I've personally been in the test prep business for a few years now, quite a few years now. The company was founded by teachers who have been in the test prep business for decades altogether. And what we would like to do is we would like to share with you what, in our opinion, are the most important things that you need to do in order to score a 700 or above on the Gmat. And before we get started, sort of right up there in the front, for any of you who are, because there are a few first timers in the audience, if you do decide to purchase a course with us, you'll have a 20% off for the next 48 hours as a gift for joining this webinar. So this is unfortunately what many people look like when they study for the Gmat. They feel like they're banging their head up against the wall and just trying to chug through all of these equations of vocabulary words and strategies and skills and all that sort of thing. And what I'd like to take the first 10 minutes or so to talk about is why this is the wrong way to approach the Gmat. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take all of our experience as teachers at ExamPal and sort of condense it into a few key points about what is the Gmat, how you should think about the Gmat, how it's different from standardized tests, and how you should build your strategy in general. This is especially important for the first timers. There's a few first timers among you, but it's also important for retakers, especially those of you who have quite a while, say 3 weeks or more before your exam. Okay, and the first thing that we have learned over time as teachers standing in front of classes is that there are many different ways to solve every single question. And therefore, I need to explain different things to students, to different students differently. And this is very frustrating for me as a teacher, and it's also very frustrating for you as a student sometimes when you're just looking at an explanation. And maybe you can follow through the formal math, especially those of you who have read the official guide explanations to the Gmat. They tend to be these very formal sorts of explanations that don't always help you to solve other questions. And this is very frustrating. The second big problem with many of the courses and many of the methodologies that are taught for the Gmat, and something that is very important for you to keep in mind, is that the hardest part of the Gmat is not actually solving the questions. I can guarantee that the majority of people, given say 10, maybe 15 minutes to solve a question, can solve every single one of the questions posed on the exam. Unfortunately, you do not have this amount of time. All you have is about 2 minutes per question on average, a little bit more in quant, a little bit less in verbal, but about 2 minutes per average per question. So your main goal, your main difficulty in preparing for the Gmat is to learn how you can get to the right answer quickly. And this should be your focus when studying for the Gmat. Once you've learned the basic material, your focus shouldn't be on what is the formal way to solve something, why precisely is it correct, but rather, how can I get to the correct answer quickly? Which strategy works best for me? All right, and this is why we have built ExamPal, and this is also how we recommend that you study. We recommend you look for a personalized approach. Which is to say, you sort of have before you the big toolbox of tools of all the ways that you can solve GMAT questions, and we'll give a few examples of these as the webinar goes on. And you sort of learn to pick and choose. You learn to pick and choose which of the tools works best for you and which doesn't. And this is why we believe, and why, in truth, many of the test prep companies and tutors out there today say that it's not good studying for these types of exams or books because they don't give you any of the personalization you actually need to succeed on the GMAT. And so this is sort of who we are. This is what we do, and this is also how we believe you should address the GMAT. And all of this, essentially all of this boils down into something that we call cognitive flexibility. And this is what I talked about before when I talked about the toolbox. The toolbox of tools of different ways to solve questions. And let me just make that concrete with a question. All right, so what you see on the board in front of you right now is the following question. For every positive x and y, 3x plus 2y divided by x plus y is between 0 and 1, 1 to 1.5, 1.5 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. And on the right-hand side of your screen, what you're looking at is what we call a precise type of solution. This is a very formal mathematical solution, similar maybe to the one you'll find in the official guide. It essentially goes, well, we can break up the numerator into x plus 2x plus 2 plus 2y. We can split that into two fractions. The fraction on the right is just 2 because it's 2x plus 2y divided by x plus y. And therefore, the total answer to this question is 2 plus a fraction, which means answer choice D. Now, you might be looking at this right now, and you might be asking yourself, I would never, ever solve this question in this particular method. And you would be absolutely right. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever to solve this type of question in this particular method, unless you're a very math-oriented person. And even then, there's likely faster ways. And just to sort of show what faster ways there are out there, what I would like to do is I would like for you to take a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes, to think of what other methods could you use to solve this specific question to get to the right answer, which is D. So have at it, and please type in the chat what other methods you think there are to solve this specific question. For those of you who joined in a little bit late to our webinar, welcome. My name is David. I'm a senior tutor at Exampel. I will be your host in today's webinar. So again, to repeat the question, on the board, you see a very formal mathematical sort of solution to the question. What is the value of 3x plus 2y divided by x plus y between which two numbers? What I would like to do is I would like you to type into chat other options for solving this specific question. What other methods can you think of? Mm-hmm. And so plugging in for x and for y substitution, how would that work? What exactly would you do? And there's no necessarily right or wrong answers. I'm just curious to see what you guys think up. And I also want you to see that your different colleagues will likely post different solutions into chat. And this sort of emphasizes that different people just need to pick up different tools as they go along. So picking up numbers is a very, very easy way to go. Any other ideas? Anything besides just plugging in a value for x and a value for y? All right, I'll give it a few more seconds for those typing to finish typing, and then I'll suggest a few other methods of solving this question. No, the typers have given up. Okay. All right. So one method, and this is honestly probably the fastest and the most common way to solve this specific question, is exactly what you have written into chat. And that's just plugging in two specific numbers. And so, for example, if we set x equals y equals 1, then the expression turns into 3 plus 2 divided by 1 plus 1, which is 2.5. And since whichever answer choice is correct has to be correct for every single possible value of x and y that are positive that we choose, then that means that A, B, C, and E are all eliminated, and we can choose choice D. And sort of, if we're sort of to focus in on the difference between these two answer choices for a second, then the current answer choice that's on the board, the very formal mathematical one, tells you precisely why D is the answer. It's right there in front of you. It's all those equations. They prove that D is the correct answer. On the other hand, this answer choice, which we call an alternative type of methodology, doesn't actually prove why D is the answer. It just tells you, well, it can't be A, it can't be B, it can't be C, it can't be E, and therefore it has to be D. And the thing to remember about the GMAT is that it does not matter how you get to the right answer. And point of fact, there are questions that the formal precise mathematical rigorous solution to is extraordinarily long, and you'll never ever have to do it on the actual exam. Whereas a choice like this, which sort of hacks the question as it were, is very applicable and is even what the exam expects you to do. And this is to tie back into cognitive flexibility. The exam is about cognitive flexibility. It is about how many different ways can you approach a question. And it's important for me to take the time on a very, very simple question like this to talk about it, so as to really hone this point in. Okay, and a different method of solving this question, which isn't rigorously mathematical, and it isn't just blind guessing either, is somewhere in the middle. It's basically to look at our fraction and say, well, twice the denominator is 2x plus 2y, and the numerator is bigger than that. But it's smaller than 3 times the denominator, right? Because 3 times the denominator is 3 times x plus y. So it's going to be between 2 and 3. And these types of, we call them logical approaches, they tend to be very wordy. They tend to be based on the fundamental logical properties, number properties. And again, we're going to be using most of our examples from quant today, though we will see a few verbal examples later on. But these tend to be less about rigorous solutions and less about hacking the question and more about understanding what on earth is going on in the question, sort of being able to zoom out and look at it. Right? And together, these 3 types of methodologies, we call them precise, alternative, and logical approaches, they form the PAL of ExamPal, and they are to give you an example of the different types of tools, and people mentioned needing strategies before. So what I would recommend for those of you who seeking strategies is exactly what we just did with this specific question. So when you're solving a question, especially if you get that question wrong, especially if you're a retaker, what you need to do is you need to look at the question. You need to ask yourself why you got that question wrong. And you need to stop and try to solve it in more than one way. You need to sort of train your brain to be able to look at these types of questions in different ways. And over time, this will give you the flexibility you need to break through that. Someone mentioned going from 600 to 700. So to break through that, I don't know, 650 ceiling or 680 ceiling. This is exactly what characterizes the 700 scores, this process that we're going through right now. And so how do you do all of that? So this is going back to first timers a little bit. So first of all, make sure that you're not bored out of your mind when you're studying for the GMAT. You can do this by studying in partnerships, in pairs, find someone in your area who's studying. We personally have little teasers and interactive lessons and so on and so forth. It's extraordinarily important that you have some sort of self-feedback, self-improvement. So everything we just did for the previous question, you can formalize it a little bit. You can ask yourself, what types of solution tools do you tend to use? What types of mistakes do you tend to make? Sort of at ExamPal, we've done all of the heavy lifting for you, and we've sort of built all these categories, and you can just sort of use our algorithms. But even if you're studying by yourself, this is something that is definitely should be on your to-do list. Making a list of the tools that you're good with, making a list of the things that you're bad with, and then using that to iteratively improve. That is your way forward. And last is just to sort of fine tune and focus in. Sort of once you know what you're good at, what you're bad at, you can really pick and choose and say, this type of question I want to skip because it takes me way too much time on the exam and I can't afford to waste so much time. But this type of question I'm really, really good at. And that is sort of also something that we've built into our system. And you should do it by yourself if you're studying alone. Okay, there's a bunch of statistics behind the system. We have a bunch of awards. We have a bunch of excellent ratings that you can also check out. And most importantly, we do offer a success guarantee. So again, for those of you who are retakers, we offer a 70-point guarantee from your last exam, from your last official score. So feel free to check us out. Don't forget the discount that you get from being here at the webinar, and ask customer support for more details if you want them. Okay, so that sort of finishes the intro to this webinar. And the intro to this webinar was sort of important both for first timers who have never taken the GMAT before, do not know what it is. So it was really important for me to emphasize to you that the GMAT is not about sitting and just banging your head against the wall. It is about learning the basic materials and then learning the skills and learning which skills work for you and which don't. All of this ties into cognitive flexibility. It ties into the toolbox. How many tools do you have? And it's also very, very important for retakers as well. And we've talked a little bit about this and about this. The palgorithm is what we do. And I'm just going to skip forward. This is the summary of what I was talking about before. So precise types of methodologies. These are sort of three broad strategies that can help you to classify your types of solution tools. So one broad strategy is, for example, if you see a word problem, and it's a sort of plug and chug word problem, you just need to translate it into equations. You just need to run through the equations. You recognize that what all you have to do is just go through the motions, be careful, and you'll get to the right answer. This is what we usually term a precise type of solution methodology. It's the type of thing you'll learn in high school. The second type of methodology, which we saw before, which was based on plugging in numbers, is what we like to call an alternative type of approach. And this is essentially an approach where if you're looking at a question and you have no idea how to approach the question, or you have maybe a little bit of an idea, but you're not sure, or you don't know how to translate the question into equations, but you certainly know how to take the answer choices and plug them into the data in the question to see which of the answer choices work. So all of these types of methodologies, which sort of circumvent actually solving the question, we like to call them alternative approaches. And the guiding line behind this is sort of like, I don't want to think too deeply about the question. I don't want to do all the hard work that goes into the question, but I do want to get to the right answer. This type of thinking is alternative. And the final type of thought process you can use to approach various verbal questions and quant questions is what we call logical. And that sort of was the example of the numerator versus denominator. And we're going to see a few more complex examples in a few minutes. And okay, great. So let's move on into the examples themselves. And this, of course, we've already talked about. And so let's look at question number 1 together. So of the 900 guests that attended the wedding, 36% were women. If 450 men left the wedding, the woman would be what percentage of the remaining guests? 18%, 24%, 48%, 72%, 90%. So please take a minute and a half or so to think about the question and to write down how you would approach to solve it. You don't have to go all the way, but I would at least like you to write down how you think this question should be approached. What should you do to solve a specific question? All right, so I'm going to put on a timer on my end, and please take the next minute or so to think about and hopefully solve this question. And don't forget to type in both your solution methodology and your answer into chat. All right, any ideas yet? You're at just about 1 minute of thought for this question. All right, so let's forego the actual answer because a minute and a half has passed. How would you approach this specific question? This is a medium level question, more or less. It's not terribly hard. It's not terribly easy. It's a little bit annoying technically if you do it incorrectly. And as we will see shortly, if you do it correctly, it is very, very short and sweet. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, type the answer into chat. I'm interested to see, I don't actually care about the actual answer so much. What I care about is the method. That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about methodologies. A specific question isn't interesting. All right. So Sanjula, I hope I pronounced that correctly. How did you solve this question? So Stephanie says she used, she calculated the number of women as a total. A two-step approach. And did anyone else do something different? Or did everyone just do a two-step approach? The proportion of what was remaining is interesting. All right, so let's look over a few solutions to this specific question. All right. And the very, very standard solution, which is, I believe, what was written in chat, the two-step approach, is to just straight up calculate. It's to say, you know what? I know what I need to do. I have all the numbers before me. I know how to do the math. I'm just going to do the math. This is a precise type of approach, as mentioned before. So let's do it. So if 36% of the 900 women, of the 900 guests were women, that means that we have 36 divided by 100 times 900. This is the number of women. You can cancel out the 100. You get 36 times 9. Then you're stuck with doing that math. It's not terrible. It's not terribly fun either. This is one way to shortcut through it. 360 minus 36. 324 women in the wedding total. So now what do we have to do? Well, we know the number of women who are in the original wedding. We know that 450 men left the wedding, and therefore none of the women left. So there are 450 guests remaining with the same number of women. So now we have to calculate 324 divided by 450. And this is where the precise type of approach gets annoying because this is not fun arithmetic to do. So if you're good at estimations, you can go ahead and try to estimate that. One easy way to estimate it is to multiply by 2 because then the denominator is very close to 100. And then so it's going to be something above 64, 65. It's going to be answer choice D. So that's one way to do the math. If you're not so great at estimating, then you have to break it down. It breaks down into 3 times 108 divided by 3 times 150. You can cancel out the 3's. You can divide by 3 again. 36 divided by 50, 72 over 100, 72%. Answer choice D. And I'm out of breath from trying to go through all of this math. Okay, so this is the big disadvantage of the precise type of approach. Number one is putting it into equations correctly. And number two is actually having to go through all of this math. Okay. And what I want to do now is I want to pause for another, say, 20, 30 seconds, not too long, and ask yourself, can you see a shorter way to solve this specific question? All right. That does not involve this two-step calculation, which works, and it always works. And it's important to say that sort of the precise type of plug and chug numbers always work because GMAT questions are solvable. They can just take a while. And if you don't have the time, or if you're not very good at math, it's probably not the way for you. So can you see a shorter way to solve this specific question? Suggestions. I don't actually want you to give me a full-fledged proof. We'll look at one in a second. Suggestions in chat. Do you have any idea for something that you can do to cut through all of the calculations? No ideas at all. Well, now you all know what you have to work on. And what you have to work on is precisely this. It is learning how to recognize the underlying fundamental properties in questions such as these. And in this case, we're going to go over what we like to term a logical type of a solution approach. And it goes essentially like this. So as we know, the percentage is the part over the whole. And so what we need to find out is the number of women over all guests. So far, we're good. But the thing is that we don't actually have to do all of the calculations that we did before because none of the women left, right? We said that 450 men left the wedding, and this is exactly half of the people at the wedding. So that means that you have the same number of women at the wedding, but you only have half of the guests, and therefore the remaining percentage, the percentage of the remaining guests, is exactly twice what it was before. All right. And so once again, we're back at answer choice D. And so what is the secret behind this type of solution approach? Because it maybe looks really nice when I'm sort of putting it on the board and you're like, oh, I would never have thought of that. So the thing is, you would have thought of it. You need to practice thinking about it. It doesn't come naturally because the natural thing that we're taught to do in high school and college and whatever is just to chug through all of the equations. And to get to a solution like the one that's on the board now, you have to train yourself to sort of zoom out. You have to train yourself to say, okay, I'm talking about percentages. Maybe I should look at the ratio instead of doing the math. Maybe I can see if the numbers sort of make me are sort of aligned nicely like they are sort of in this type of question. And therefore I won't have to actually do all the calculations. And what should be going on in your mind again when you solve GMAT questions is not how do I prove that something is the right answer. What should be going on in your mind when you solve GMAT questions is how do I get to the right answer quickly. And in this case, possibly estimating the answer, sort of so getting to say this stage, and then instead of actually calculating this value here, just saying, well, it's going to be above 65% and then selecting choice D. That is a much, much better choice than having actually gone through, having to actually go through all of these calculations. All right, so this is what I want to focus the webinar on. We started out with really, really simple questions before. Now we're looking at a slightly harder question. And if we actually talk about time, because time is one of the pressing problems, I think one of you at the beginning of the webinar spoke of time. So this is actually a question on our website. This is one of the questions in the fractions of percent section. And you can compare, because we collect data, we can tell which student answered with what method, how well they did. And students who tried to go through all the calculations took a very long time on average. And those who sort of managed to zoom in on the property, the underlying property, took much, much less time. Okay, so let's take a look at another question. Two printers run simultaneously. An inkjet printer that prints at a uniform rate of 80 pages every 15 minutes, and a laser printer that prints 100 pages every 10 minutes. How many minutes will it take for them to print 230 pages? So once again, this question has many ways to solve it. What I would like to do is for you to type into chat a few different ways that you can think of to solve this specific question. And again, what we're doing right now is we're practicing training the cognitive flexibility muscle, training your ability to look at a question through several different lenses. Okay, that is the goal of this question. So have at it, and please type in the chat a few different ways with which you think you can solve this specific question. Any suggestions? Are y'all still with me? Cool, perfect. Find the number of pages per minute for each. That is an entirely valid approach to solve this question. What else can you think of? I hope I haven't scared y'all into silence. Rate problems. Well, actually, then this is great for you. If you're horrible at rate problems, then you're exactly in the situation that we talked about when we talked about alternative approaches before, right? And this is a lesson for everyone. So there's a guy here or a girl, I don't know, someone whose nomiker is one space 1_1. And that person is looking at this question and is saying to themselves, I have no idea whatsoever how to go about solving this question. And what should you do then? You should do exactly what we talked about before. You should look for a way to solve this question that doesn't involve actually solving it. You should look for a way to hack through this question. All right, that is what you should be doing right now. How can you use the information given in the question to figure out which of the answer choices is correct without understanding how to formally solve the problem? All right, are there no suggestions other than finding the number of pages per minute? Okay, that's the answer, but that's not what I'm interested in right now. Approximation. Approximation is nice. Approximation is a good way to do this. What else? Okay, there we go. There we go. And great. So that is what I was hoping someone would say. And that is what I'm going to talk about a little bit now. So let's start with going over one type of solution, which is the alternative approach. And this sort of ties back in to what we said earlier. I have no idea on earth what to do with this type of question. What am I going to do? Am I going to give up on it? Am I going to skip it? Or am I going to blind guess? Or am I going to sort of maybe do something like using the answers? Because the thing with the GMAT questions is that it's not an open question. You don't have to actually know how to derive the answer on your own. All you have to do is know how to pick one of the 5 options in front of you. So one thing you can do is just try them all. So let's try option A. Let's say that it took 10 minutes. So if both of the printers together took 10 minutes, well, then the first printer, how much does it do? It prints 80 pages in 15 minutes. So that's 2/3, right? So that's somewhere around 50 to 60 pages. Even if we're not good at math, we can sort of eyeball it. That's about 50 to 60 pages from printer 1. Printer 2 in 10 minutes, hey, that's exactly 100 pages. And so in total, we're somewhere around 160 pages. Certainly not enough. That's not enough time. And so now what we need to do is we need to take more time. And so we can sort of think about which option we want to try next. We can say, well, we need to not double it, so it's definitely going to be less than 20. Maybe increase it by 1.5, and that sort of maybe makes us suspect that B is the answer just by checking one of the options. And indeed, let's look at option choice B. And say it took 15 minutes. So then printer 1 prints exactly 80 pages because that's what the question tells us. And what does printer 2 do? Well, if it prints 100 pages every 10 minutes, then in 15 minutes, that's 1.5 times that, right? So it prints 1.5 times 100 pages, which is 150 pages. The two of them together, 230 pages total. And voila, we have the answer. All right. And what you need to understand about this specific question is that it really, really showcases the power of the alternative approach. So even if you have no idea whatsoever, and you should know, right? If you don't know how to formalize this question into equations, that is definitely something to add on to your to-do list because this is a very basic type of rate and work question. So you need to know how to do it. But even if you don't, you can look at it and you can say, well, one of the answer choices has to be these 5 options right in front of me. Let's just try them out. Let's just try them out, see which of them works, and then move on with my life. And this is the alternative approach. And I don't think I have the other approach in here. Let me check. I do not. So I do want to talk about the what Sanjula said. Now, the first person, I believe Bryce, who suggested a method for solving this question, suggested that we take everything down to pages per minute. And that is a very, very standard way to solve this question. That's what you're usually taught, right? You change everything into the rate per minute, and then you sort of add them together, and then you sort of multiply up to get to 230. Unfortunately, with this specific question, the math is really annoying. So if you have 80 pages per 15 minutes, then you need to divide 80 by 15 to get however many that turns out to be. 100 divided by 10 is easy, but 80 divided by 15 isn't fun. And then you have to add those two together, and then you somehow have to compare that to 230. The math is a mess. Okay, it's not fun at all. But what is the point of this? Sort of the logical approach to this question, and again, we're talking about fundamental properties, is to ask ourselves, why do we actually take things to pages per minute? Well, because we sort of want a common denominator, right? We want to be able to compare apples to apples. So we move one printer A, the inkjet printer, to 80 pages, to however many pages per minute. We move the laser printer to pages per minute, and then we compare the two of them. But we don't have to compare apples to apples by changing them to 1 minute. We can look for an easier common denominator. We can, for example, ask how many do both of them do in, say, 30 minutes, because it's much easier to take the inkjet printer and say that 80 times 2, so it does 160 pages in 30 minutes. And then the laser printer does 300 pages in 30 minutes, right? That's easy math. You can easily do it. And then you can add them two together and you get 460 pages in 30 minutes, and you just divide that by 2. Or alternatively, you could have jumped straight to 15. But the point in this specific question is that there are two ways of solving it, which circumvent going into all of the rigorous calculation, and both of them involve sort of taking a step back. One of the methods is on the board in front of you. It's essentially just try the answers. You know it's got to be one of these 5, just try them out. And the other type of approach is saying, instead of looking for the pages per minute, maybe let's look at pages per 10 minutes, or pages per 20 minutes, or pages per 30 minutes, because the math is much, much easier. And this is something to keep in mind when you're doing problems and when you're studying your mistakes, of course. Okay, question number 3. We're going to transition over to verbal for a bit now. And I think before we do so, the most important thing that I have to say about verbal is that the majority of people find verbal difficult because they try to go through every single one of the answers and they run out of time, especially if you're not a native speaker. And even if you are, then reading all of the answers is the wrong way to go. And someone was asking for tips for reading comprehension before, and this is one of them. The tip for reading comprehension, other than hopefully increasing your reading speed and learning to skim and those sorts of things, is to not get confused by all of the answer choices out there. And we're going to see a critical reasoning question right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you not to look at these answer choices. What I'm going to ask you to do is to read the question stem, all right, the sentence up at the top, read the question below it, try not to look at the answers, and try to think by yourself what the answer could be. So what assumptions underlie the argument? All right. Just for those of you who have never seen a critical reasoning question before, the way that they work is this. You have basically a small passage up at the top of the screen. You have a question that relates to the logic of the passage, the arguments in the passage. It could be to strengthen, to weaken, to compare, something of that kind. In this case, you're asked what the assumptions of the argument are. And I would ask that you do not look at any of these official solutions if you can. I would instead ask that you try to pause and think for yourself, what could an assumption of this argument be? All right, so take a minute and type your answers into chat. Please try not to look at the actual answers, even though they're right there in front of you. Any ideas? I know, thinking is hard work. I apologize. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And notice that you've all converged on more or less the same thing. Um, Pretty much exactly the same thing. Now, I don't know how many of you reached this conclusion after having read the answer choices, or if you just did it independently as I asked you to, but you are all correct. And this is exactly what answer choice C says, essentially. And sort of the reason that this exercise that we just did right now is so important is because the way to think of answer choices, especially in critical reasoning, but also in other, in reading comprehension as well, and to a lesser extent in sentence correction, is that you can think of these 5 answer choices as 5 expert salesmen. Each of them is trying to convince you that their product is the best, and they're all very, very good at what they do. And it's just horribly confusing. You just end up looking at a statement and saying, well, maybe that sounds good, that doesn't sound good. And then you try to justify different answer choices to yourself, and you land in a mess. And this is why people don't complete the verbal section on time. And this is why people have such a large amount of difficulty with the verbal section. And instead, what all of you have done and proved to yourself also that you can do is you don't actually need the answer choices, especially in critical reasoning, to a lesser extent in reading comprehension, and sometimes in sentence correction as well. You can just figure out the answer straight up by looking at the question and thinking about it. And then when you go to the answer choices, you have an anchor. You know that the answer has to be something about interviews. It has to be about how the interviews can identify the applicants or the skills or whatever it is, or the personalities in this case. And then you can go over the answers and you can say, well, hey, that's exactly what C tells us. Therefore, C is the answer, and I'm not even going to bother thinking about any of the other choices. And this is the ideal way to solve a critical reasoning question. All right, so let's just go over the logic a little bit for those of you who didn't follow it. So the passage starts out by saying that the interview is an essential part of the successful hiring program, and there's our keyword um, because it can eliminate unsuitable applicants. All right, this is why the interview is so essential. And therefore, what is the assumption behind this? Sort of what is the statement that if you negate it, would negate the entire argument? That interviews have to be able to actually do what they're supposed to be doing, which is find the applicants with bad personalities and eliminate them, which is answer choice C. All right, and if we briefly go over the other, just for for the exercise, as it were, go over the other answer choices, um, then I think D is the only one that might confuse people because it also talks about interviews and personalities. The thing to notice about D is that it has the word only, a GMAT answer that has like an extreme word, or rather a verbal answer that has an extreme word, such as only or always, or sometimes a weak answer, such as some, is it should be a red flag. It's very unlikely to be the answer because this is just too extreme for the purposes of this question. So that is something to keep in mind. There are many other things to keep in mind, which we won't go over now. I will say that this is actually an official question of the GMAT that we are able to show. So this is how a real CR question looks, though admittedly not a terribly difficult one. Okay, cool. So I think that summarizes the first part of the webinar, which is all about cognitive flexibility, the different tools. I've talked about it quite a bit. I'm not going to talk about it again. The one thing that I will sort of emphasize about this is the rapid improvement. There are, I think, about half of you are retakers. And for retakers, it is extremely important to sort of learn how to break through that glass ceiling above your head. How do you rapidly improve? And the answer to that is essentially that you need to learn from your mistakes. And this boils down to sort of what we talked about above, the different types of solution methodologies and different types of mistakes. And we like to divide mistakes. This is how we recommend you do it. You can, of course, devise your own method, but we like to divide mistakes into 3 different categories, which are professional, technical, and strategic. So a professional mistake is, for example, the person who said that they just don't know how to solve rate and work fractions. That, for me, is a mistake that tells you to go back and study your material. So if you find that you make a mistake where you just didn't know the rule, you weren't familiar with a vocabulary word, you didn't quite understand the logic of how a strengthener or a weakener worked, so on and so forth. This is a professional mistake. This should send you back to your books, okay? A technical type of mistake is a silly error. You forgot a plus, you forgot a minus, you multiplied incorrectly, you marked the wrong answer, you missed a piece of data. All these types of things are in questions where you know how to solve them. you started off on the right path, but you just made a mistake along the way. This has to do a lot with focus, and it has to do a lot with time. So if these are the majority of the mistakes that you're making, then you're somewhere at your plateau most likely. And the best way for you to change up your game and to improve your score is either just by rote practice, just making a little bitty tiny improvements and hoping you get there, or by looking to fundamentally change your game plan, which is the third type of mistake, which is strategic. So strategic type of mistake is, for example, looking at one of the quant questions that we looked at before, say, for example, the printer question, and trying to calculate the pages per minute. This is a strategic type of mistake because it's a good way, it's a valid way to solve the question, but it's horribly wrong. It's horribly long, excuse me. There are much, much faster ways to solve that specific question. And if you find yourself in a crunch and making errors due to lack of time, then there's a very good chance that what you need to do is do all of the hard work that we've been talking about to analyze how can more time. The last part of this webinar, before we get into the Q&A, and you can ask me whatever you like, is how to combine all of this together. So I've talked an enormous amount about the overall GMAT strategy, what you should focus on when studying, tools, cognitive flexibility, yada, yada. What should your actual study plan be? And so this is more or less the plan that we recommend. 6 to 8 weeks, 120 hours. This comes to approximately 15 hours per week. In our experience, this is enough for you to remain focused, so you don't start forgetting stuff without being so much that you just lose focus because it's too intense and you burn out. All right, so this is sort of a good balance in our experience. If you sort of take our specific course, then everything is nice and organized for you on the course trail. You just go over things in order. You have nice little benchmarks and dates and all that sort of thing that will help you organize your trail. This takes approximately 50 months. We generally recommend dividing every subject matter, every topic matter into a day of just sitting and learning the basic material, and then a day of practicing questions and debugging them and so on and so forth. It is very, very important, especially if you're not a native speaker, especially for the person, for example, who is talking about reading comprehension issues, to make sure that you have a daily reading schedule. And you have, maybe you have an idea, but most students have no idea the amount of effect, or rather the strength of just improving your reading speed. So if you improve your reading speed just by 10 to 15%, then you will have quite a lot more time to think about every single one of the questions on the exam, both in quant and in verbal. Super important. So this is goal number 1 of your reading schedule. And goal number 2 is just get familiar with thinking as you read. So it's not like reading a novel. It's more like reading an Economist article or something like that, where you're sort of arguing with the author as you're reading the article. And you can consider this as a reading comprehension or critical reasoning passage. So the author is arguing something or another, and you need to pause and ask yourself, how are they supporting their argument? What are they strengthening? What are they weakening? What are the conflicting viewpoints, so on and so forth. This is what your daily reading schedule should be all about. I think the only thing that we haven't talked about that is extremely important to talk about is the practice cats. And with that, I think we will transition over to the Q&A. And so what I have to say about the practice cats is that the goal of the practice cats is not to, the main goal rather, is not to just figure out what your score is, all right? That is of course important. You wanna know if you're still in the 600s or if you've improved by 20 points or 50 points or whatever. The main goal of the practice cats is 1, to rehearse taking the exam. So when you do the practice cat, you wanna take the full 3.5-hour chunk of time. Set it aside, preferably at the same time as you're doing your real exam. You want to be in a quiet place without distractions. Certainly put your phone away. Don't have your phone with you. Don't pause the exam. Do it like a real exam. All right. And what you should think of is a dress rehearsal. All right. Just like before you get married. I don't know if any of you are at that stage yet or not. But you go and you, for the bride and the groom, they rehearse, they talk to the priest or whoever your religious official is, and then you make sure that everything is prepared and everyone's ready. So on D-Day, you don't have to worry about stuff. All right, you want to, on D-Day, when you actually go and actually take the GMAT exam, you want to think only about solving the questions, not about the strategy, not about your stamina, not about what's the order, what's the information, what are the instructions. None of that should be in your mind. All you should be thinking about is solving the questions, and this is why the CAT is a dress rehearsal. The other thing that you need to use the CAT for is as a learning tool. We've talked a bunch today about learning from your mistake reasons, learning from your mistakes, finding out your strengths, your weaknesses, so on and so forth. This is what the CAT should focus you on. It should put a big red flag up of you're good at this, you're bad at that. It should allow you to make a decision of these types of questions I want to skip. It should allow you to make a decision of I have enough time or I don't have enough time. These are the important things to focus on when taking the CAT and not your actual score. All right. And last thing before we go over to the Q&A is, take a day off before the actual exam. Think of yourself as a big athlete before the main event. You don't want to wear yourself out. So, you can study for an hour or two, maybe even half a day, but don't overdo it. Then crush the GMAT because you certainly have deserved it. And with that, we will switch over to the promotion just to remind you, and we are open for Q&A. So for the remainder of this webinar, if you have any questions at all, I will be happy to answer. Or any comments on this webinar and so on and so forth. So ask away. Great. It seems like everyone knows everything and no one has any questions. That'll be a first. All right, seriously though, there's relatively few people. Like I've had like dozens of people in webinars, and today there's only 7. So you actually have the advantage of being able to ask me a question here. So take advantage of it. So do I have tips for the verbal section for non-native speakers? So besides what I said about the daily reading schedule, which is extremely important, the other thing is not to sweat too much over vocabulary. So often you can figure out the vocabulary from context. That's important in reading comprehension. It is less important in the other sections. In terms of sentence correction, you should always, you should learn the traps essentially. So there's a ton of very common traps in sentence correction. This is also true for native speakers. It also helps everyone, but especially for non-native speakers, if like you can't hear what the right answer is. And since learning all of the various grammar rules in the GMAT is horrendous, I don't recommend that to anyone. What I do recommend is that you go over and learn the different types of traps that the GMAT likes to do in sentence correction. So for example, switching around the pronouns, for example, breaking the parallelism, all these sorts of things that just occur again and again and again. And if you get them right, then you're definitely in the mid-range of sentence correction. And maybe even say into 2/3 or the 80% of sentence correction, just by recognizing all the traps that the GMAT likes to do. For more advice, I'd need more information about your specific status. So next question. I have mostly been studying by drilling questions and have plateaued at around 600 to 610. Do you think, since I've recently found a lot of useful tools like this that I will be utilizing for the next 2 weeks, I could still potentially push up to a 700? I wish I could answer that question. But 2 weeks without knowing exactly where you're at, I don't know. To be honest, 2 weeks for 100-point improvement sounds very rough. So unless you're basically studying every day, all day, and are not going to burn out by doing that, then I'm a little bit skeptical. You can certainly do it. What I would say is that drilling questions is the wrong way to go, and hopefully like this has basically been the entire theme of the webinar. Hopefully you'll agree with me after having seen this webinar. You don't want to just drill questions and then go look at the answers. You want to learn. All right, you want to see what you're getting wrong, why you're getting it wrong. You need to learn to recognize the concepts in specific questions. A score of 600 to 610 usually suggests, I don't know your quant verbal breakdown, but it usually suggests that you know the material to a basic level, but it hasn't sunk in yet. you're not really comfortable with the material. Once you get to this high 600s, that's when you're comfortable with the material. And to break through the 700, you need to be very comfortable with the material and also very comfortable with all kinds of different types of solution methodologies. So that is sort of my initial assessment based on the information you've given. Next, how many hours per day do you recommend to go from 480 to 600? That, of course, depends on how long you plan to be studying for. In 3 weeks. It's hard. I really, you would need, if you like that sort of information, then please consider sending us your details. So, create a free account. You can just create a free account on our website. Send us your ESR from chat, and we can discuss your personal details. I can't give that sort of advice because I need to know your quant verbal breakdown, strengths, weaknesses, and so on and so forth. But 480 to 600 plus, it's doable in 3 weeks, but it depends what exactly you need to improve. It really, really depends. So I'd need more information. So please contact us via our website and sign up for a free account and so on. Mostly the quant. So yeah, probably, but you'll need to be focused. Like if you just wander around solving stuff, you won't get there. You'll need to either take a course or private classes. You'll need to know what you're doing, but it's definitely possible. Any other questions? Questions? Going once, going twice. Advice for a first timer. Everything I've said today. No, seriously. Seriously, yes, pretty much. Especially the first part. So the first part where we looked at the very easy question, and we talked a lot about different strategies, different solution methodologies. This is the Gmat Big Picture. This is what you need to understand about the Gmat. It's that you need to get past the sort of the stage of learning the basic materials, the basic rules, the basic vocab, that sort of stuff. Once you get past that basic stage, it's much less about drilling and much more about sort of self-improvement and self-feedback and that sort of thing. So that is my advice. I would consider usually taking the first exam, like leaving, say, at least a month or two after your first exam in case you need to take it again. I don't know what sort of score you're aiming for, but that is very, very general standard advice to give. Yeah, and start, like, take the first step. You've already taken the first step by coming here. Take the next one by signing up to our program, seeing if you like it. And if you do, using this 20% off. Any more questions? 5 minutes to go and 5 questions to answer. What should be your strategy? You should not be in that situation in the first place. This is exactly why you take a CAT. If when you take the CATs, you see that you are consistently at 5 minutes to go with 5 questions, then you're doing it wrong. You need to spread out your guesses evenly. Like there's actually official GMAT research that shows, you can check out our YouTube channel. I think it's there somewhere. That if you guess a bunch of questions at the end, it hurts you more than if you spread your guesses out throughout the exam. So first answer, do not get into that situation. Second answer, if you are there, then I would try to answer 2 or 3 of the questions to the best of your ability and guess the others. That's what I would do. Can I still get a 600 plus if the IR, look, the IR isn't part of your score. So your composite score is only composed of the quant and the verbal. IR is not in it, essay is not in it. This is why I always downplay their role. It's just much less important for admissions. It's there for all sorts of other reasons, but you shouldn't worry about it. All right, last, say, 3 questions, and then we're done for today. How does the expert assessment work? If you're talking about the expert assessments that we provide on our website, then please go over there and we'll be happy to give you all of the information. In general, it's basically I or one of the other tutors goes over all of your data in the system and gives you detailed statistical feedback about your strengths, your weaknesses, what tools you've used, what tools you haven't used, where you need to focus on, that sort of thing, along with information about your timing. So, very, very in-depth statistical information about you specifically. What are the reasons for IRAWA? That's just a topic for a discussion in of itself. As far as I know, the IR is basically the GMAT sort of wants to convince business schools that it actually tests business-related stuff. And integrated reasoning is much more similar to case studies that, for example, you'll see in consultancy interviews and so on. And so the GMAC, the company that writes the GMAC, is trying to push the IR rather unsuccessfully so far. And essays are, to be honest, from what I've heard, they're mainly used by the admissions consultancy to make sure that sort of like what happens sometimes is that people sort of, and this is a bit of speculation, right? I don't actually know, but is that people hire people to write essays for them, and then sort of the schools, the business schools, get this admissions profile with this amazing essay and this really horrible GMAT score, and then they sort of look to to the AWA to make sure that that person actually wrote the essay. But again, this speculation, I don't actually know. But at any rate, you don't have to care about that. You just need an average score. That's really all you need for your essay. Last question for today. Would schools even see that portion of your test? Yes, of course. The GMAT, when it sends the report, it sends every part of the GMAT in that report. You also have to note, specifically request if you want to send all the previous scores or only the last score, all the sort of thing you can go on and read on mba.com. And with that, I believe we are done for today. So thank you very much for having been here with us today. I hope I was able to help. I hope you learned. Please do create a free account with us and check us out. See if you like us. Even if you don't, then I strongly recommend you try to implement for yourself all the things that we've talked about today. Best of luck in your future studies. And remember, the GMAT is just a stepping stone onto other more interesting things. So, don't sweat it too much. All right. So with that, we will end today's webinar. Have a lovely rest of the day.